Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to a time when your iPhone alarm was centuries away, and the concept of a snooze button was utterly alien. Imagine for a moment, you are a medieval monk. The air around you is cool, damp, and smells faintly of beeswax and old parchment. You're bundled in thick wool, not for comfort, but for survival against the chill of the unheated stone monastery. Outside, the world is cloaked in impenetrable darkness. The only sound's the rustle of wind through bare trees and the distant hoot of an owl. There are no streetlights, no glow from digital screens, just the vast, silent, terrifying expanse of the medieval night. Your life, your very soul, is dictated by a rigid schedule, a horarium, that demands your presence in the dimly lit chapel multiple times throughout the day and, crucially, through the deepest hours of the night. You're part of a community bound by prayer, labor, and silence, where every hour has a purpose, every chime a command. You probably won't survive this level of structured discipline. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening from somewhere exotic, let me know your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your existence as a medieval monk, particularly within the Benedictine order, was a carefully choreographed dance with time, a monastic ballet performed across the 24-hour cycle. The Rule of Saint Benedict, a foundational text for Western monasticism, laid out a grueling yet spiritually enriching routine. You would rise in the darkest part of the night, long before dawn, for matins, the first of the canonical hours. This wasn't some gentle awakening. It was an abrupt tearing away from what little sleep you had, into the cold, the silence, and the solemnity of prayer. Picture yourself, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, your breath fogging in the frigid air, as you stumble along stone corridors, guided only by the flickering light of a single lantern carried by the prior. Lauds would follow as the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky, marking the official start of the day. Then came prime, terce sext, none vespers, and finally compline, each punctuated by prayer, study, and manual labor. This wasn't merely a suggestion. It was the framework of your salvation, the path to spiritual perfection. Missing an office, particularly matins, was a grave offense, a dereliction of duty to God and your brothers. The stakes were incredibly high. Imagine the immense pressure, then on those responsible for timekeeping. In a world devoid of electricity, digital displays, or even widely available mechanical clocks, how did you, or rather, the monastery, manage to keep such an exact schedule? How did you know when to rouse yourself from your meagre cot, when to assemble in the chapel, when to break for a meagre meal, or when to return to your scriptorium for hours of copying manuscripts? It wasn't about convenience. It was about cosmic alignment, about ensuring the prayers of the monastery resonated with the divine order of the universe. The very rhythm of the monastery was a heartbeat, and that heartbeat had to be perfectly synchronized. This wasn't about being on time for a Zoom meeting. This was about ensuring the continued favor of God upon humanity. Historians still argue whether the extreme regularity of monastic life inadvertently spurred technological innovation, or if the need for accurate timekeeping was merely a fortunate side effect of spiritual zeal. One quirky tidbit: some monastic communities even had specific rules about how many times a monk could clear his throat during a service, further emphasizing the strict control over every aspect of life, including the very air you breathed. The need for an alarm clock, therefore, was not a luxury. It was an existential necessity, a matter of spiritual survival in a world that spun without the comforting tick-tock of modern horology. You couldn't just tell time by looking at the sun or listening for the birds, because often you needed to be up when the sun was nowhere to be seen, and the birds were still dreaming of worms. Your medieval world, remember, operated on a rhythm far removed from the precise, granular divisions of our current lives. Before the invention of even rudimentary mechanical clocks, time was a far more fluid, organic concept, intrinsically linked to natural phenomena. You wouldn't check your wrist for the hour. You would gaze at the sky, feel the quality of light, or observe the length of shadows. The sun, in its majestic daily arc, was the primary timekeeper. Sunrise marked the beginning of the day, sunset the end. The moon, with its waxing and waning phases, dictated the larger cycles of weeks and months. Seasons, too, were fundamental markers, guiding agricultural practices and religious festivals. This understanding of time was deeply intuitive, almost visceral. You felt the passage of time in your bones, in the turning of the earth beneath your feet. But for a monastic community, this broad, naturalistic timekeeping simply wasn't precise enough. The rule of Saint Benedict, as we just explored, demanded punctuality, a sharp break from the general looseness of the secular world. How did you, then, or more specifically, the early monastic communities, begin to impose order on this natural chaos? One of the simplest and most ancient methods was the observation of stars. In the quiet solitude of the monastery courtyard, on a clear night, you could look up and identify specific constellations as they moved across the celestial dome. Polaris, the North Star, remained relatively fixed, while others rotated around it, providing a rough, but consistent, indicator of the passing hours of darkness. Imagine the deep chill of the night air, the crisp clarity of the starlight, as you sought out the familiar patterns of Ursa Major or Orion. This was astronomy born of necessity, a practical application of celestial mechanics long before telescopes or complex mathematical models. Historians still argue whether the precise mapping of stars by early monastic scholars was purely for timekeeping or also held deeper theological significance, reflecting a desire to understand God's creation. Another venerable method involved the use of fixed reference points within the monastery itself. A ray of sunlight penetrating a specific window and striking a particular mark on the wall could indicate the precise hour of terce or sext on a clear day. This was a form of architectural sundial, albeit an extremely localized and context-specific one. You would become intimately familiar with these subtle shifts in light and shadow, learning to read the monastery's architecture as if it were a giant clock face. The challenge, of course, was what to do on cloudy days, or more critically, during the long hours of darkness when the sun was absent. This is where human ingenuity, born of spiritual necessity, truly began to blossom. One quirky tidbit: some monks reportedly trained themselves to wake at specific times by the internal rhythm of their bodies, a sort of medieval biological alarm clock, though this was likely more anecdotal than widely practiced. It's a reminder that even without technology, the human body has its own remarkable capabilities. These early methods, while seemingly crude to our modern sensibilities, represented the cutting edge of medieval time measurement. They were born from a deep understanding of the natural world and an unwavering commitment to a divinely ordained schedule. The reliance on observation, on reading the subtle cues of nature, cultivated a profound connection to the environment that we, with our digital detachment, can scarcely imagine. You weren't just observing the sun. You were living by it, feeling its rhythm permeate every aspect of your day. It wasn't about telling time. It was about living time in its most fundamental and unadorned form. The silence of the monastery, broken only by the rustle of robes or the distant chirping of crickets, allowed for a heightened awareness of these natural markers. You developed an internal clock, tuned to the subtle shifts in light and shadow, sound and silence, that marked the passing hours. This quiet attentiveness was not merely a side effect. It was an integral part of the monastic contemplative practice, where external precision fostered internal focus. The demands of the rule of Saint Benedict pushed these communities to seek ever more reliable methods, moving them beyond the purely observational into the realm of controlled, engineered solutions. The journey to the mechanical alarm clock begins not with gears and springs, but with a deep, existential need to mark the hours of prayer, even in the blackest night. As the monastic life demanded ever greater precision than merely observing the sun and stars, you, or rather, the innovative minds within the monasteries, turned to more controlled, man-made devices. Among the earliest and most widespread of these were sundials and water clocks. Sundials, in their simplest form, are incredibly ancient, dating back thousands of years. You've probably seen them in gardens or parks, a flat surface with markings and a gnomon, the stick or blade that casts a shadow. As the sun moves across the sky, the shadow shifts, indicating the hour. In the medieval monastery, sundials became more sophisticated. You might find a large, carefully calibrated sundial etched into the flagstones of the cloister, or a smaller, portable version carried by a monk responsible for managing the daily schedule. The beauty of the sundial lay in its simplicity and reliability, at least on a clear day. Its major drawback, however, was glaringly obvious. It was utterly useless after sunset, on cloudy days or indoors. For a community that needed to observe matins in the dead of night, often hours before dawn, a device entirely dependent on direct sunlight was, to put it mildly, less than ideal. This limitation became a powerful driver for the development of alternatives, pushing the boundaries of medieval ingenuity. Imagine the frustration, the spiritual anxiety of a prior trying to ensure the community was roused for night prayers, only to find the sky overcast and the sundial a silent, useless ornament. This practical challenge spurred significant innovation. Historians still argue whether the development of specific monastic sundial designs was influenced more by classical Roman knowledge or by indigenous medieval mathematical advancements. One quirky tidbit: some medieval sundials were not just for time, but also incorporated calendars, indicating the day of the year by the length of the gnomons' shadow, turning them into fascinating, multifunctional astronomical instruments. This is where water clocks, or clepsydrae, entered the scene, offering a revolutionary leap forward because they could operate independently of the sun. The principle was deceptively simple: water slowly dripping or flowing from one container into another. The first container would have a hole at the bottom, allowing water to escape at a relatively constant rate. The second container, or a marked scale on the first, would then indicate the passage of time as the water level dropped or rose. Imagine a large, earthenware pot, carefully crafted, with a tiny, precisely drilled hole. You fill it with water, and then, slowly, inexorably, the water begins its descent, each drop a silent marker of a moment past. The ingenuity lay in maintaining a constant flow rate, which was a significant engineering challenge. Factors like water pressure, temperature, and even the cleanliness of the water could affect the accuracy. Early water clocks were, admittedly, not terribly precise, but they offered something sundials could not: continuous, uninterrupted timekeeping, day or night. You could set a water clock before Vespers and trust that it would provide some indication of when Matins was due, even in the deepest darkness. The monastic communities quickly adopted and adapted these devices, recognizing their immense value. They were often placed in a central, accessible location within the monastery, perhaps in the cloisters or a specific chamber, where the sound of the dripping water might even have become a soothing, rhythmic backdrop to daily life, a constant, gentle reminder of the onward march of time. The silence of the monastery allowed for the subtle sounds of these devices to be truly effective. The quiet drip, drip, drip of the water, a subtle, almost hypnotic sound, would have been the auditory heartbeat of the monastery, especially during the long hours of night. The ability to rely on something other than a human watchman for night prayers was a game changer, freeing up monks from the constant vigilance that had previously been required. This early adoption of water power for timekeeping laid crucial groundwork for later, more complex mechanical inventions. With sundials limited by light and early water clocks by their inherent imprecision, the medieval monastery, in its relentless pursuit of punctuality for prayer, turned to another ingenious, if somewhat unconventional, method: the humble candle. You might think of candles as mere sources of light, but in the hands of medieval monks, they were transformed into rudimentary, yet surprisingly effective, timekeeping devices. Imagine a long, slender candle, perhaps made of beeswax, carefully prepared and marked along its length with lines or notches. These marks represented specific intervals of time: an hour, half an hour, or even shorter durations. The principle was simple: as the candle burned down, consuming the wax, the flame would reach each successive mark, indicating the passage of a set period. You would light the candle at a known time, say after compline. And then, as you toiled in the scriptorium, or perhaps even attempted to get a few hours of sleep, the slow, steady burn of the wick would silently measure the hours. This was timekeeping by consumption, a literal burning away of moments. The challenges, of course, were numerous. Different candles would burn at different rates depending on their thickness, the quality of the wax, and even ambient drafts. A flickering breeze could speed up the burn, throwing off the timing. You'd need a steady hand and a keen eye to truly rely on them for precise scheduling. Historians still argue whether candle clocks were truly widespread in all monasteries, or if their use was more concentrated in specific, highly disciplined communities. One quirky tidbit: some candle clocks were designed with weights attached to cords that would drop and hit a metal plate as the wax melted, creating a rudimentary, albeit quiet, alarm sound. This was an early attempt to automate the alarm function without any complex gears. Despite their limitations, candle clocks offered a significant advantage. They provided both light and time simultaneously, making them particularly useful during the long, dark hours of the medieval night. For a monk performing a vigil or copying manuscripts by candlelight, the gradual shortening of the flame would have been a constant, subtle reminder of the ticking away of the night, bringing closer the moment of matins. It was a visible, tangible representation of time's relentless march, a silent countdown to the next prayer office. The smell of burning wax and the soft glow would have been integral to the monastic environment, a sensory experience tied to the passage of time. These candle clocks required careful management. You couldn't just light one and forget about it. A monk, perhaps the sacristan, would be responsible for preparing the candles, ensuring they were of consistent quality and marking them accurately. This was a task requiring patience and precision, a humble yet vital contribution to the monastic horarium. It was a constant battle against the inherent variability of natural materials, a testament to the dedication of these early timekeepers. The very act of preparing and monitoring these candles was a meditative practice in itself, forcing a monk to pay close attention to the subtle dance of flame and wax. This method, while simple, underscores the pervasive need for timekeeping in monastic life. It shows the ingenuity in adapting readily available materials for a complex purpose. It wasn't about fancy mechanisms. It was about getting the job done, ensuring the community stayed on its divinely appointed schedule. The soft, ethereal glow of the candle, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls, would have been the monastery's silent chronometer, burning away the minutes until the next call to prayer. The quiet atmosphere of the monastery meant that even the subtle changes in the candle's flame, or the soft hiss of the wick, would have been perceptible, acting as subtle cues. These were not loud buzzers, but rather a gentle, almost imperceptible reminder of the relentless flow of time. While candle clocks offered a temporary solution for monastic timekeeping, their inherent unreliability pushed the boundaries of medieval engineering, leading to significant refinements in water clocks. You see, the monks, in their unwavering commitment to the strict Benedictine rule, needed something more consistent, more precise than a flickering flame or a shadow that vanished with the clouds. The basic principle of the clepsydra, water dripping from one vessel to another, had been around for millennia, but its accuracy was notoriously fickle. The key challenge was maintaining a constant flow rate. As the water level in the upper vessel dropped, the pressure would decrease, causing the flow to slow down. This meant that the hours at the beginning of the cycle were shorter than those at the end, rendering the clock wildly inaccurate for the monks' rigorous schedule. This is where monastic ingenuity truly shone. Imagine the minds within the cloister, grappling with this fundamental problem. They weren't engineers in the modern sense, but they were keen observers of natural phenomena and practical problem solvers. One of the most significant advancements was the introduction of a constant pressure device. This involved a third, intermediate vessel, positioned between the main reservoir and the outflow mechanism. Water would flow from the large reservoir into this intermediate vessel, which would then overflow, maintaining a constant water level, and therefore a constant pressure, at the point of outflow. This simple, yet brilliant, innovation revolutionized water clock accuracy. Now, the water would indeed drip or flow at a much more consistent rate, leading to more uniform hours. Historians still argue whether this specific constant pressure design was an independent monastic innovation, or a rediscovery of ancient Hellenistic principles through Arabic translations. One quirky tidbit. Some larger monastic water clocks were designed to be so accurate that they were used to regulate the working hours of lay brothers, and even to measure the length of sermons, ensuring no preacher went on for too long. Beyond constant pressure, other refinements emerged. Instead of merely dripping water, some designs incorporated a float mechanism. As water filled the lower receiving vessel, a float would rise, connected to a pointer that moved along a marked scale. This allowed for easier and more precise reading of the elapsed time. Furthermore, the outflow mechanisms themselves became more sophisticated. Rather than just a simple hole, they might involve a siphon or a finely tuned orifice, further regulating the flow. Imagine the meticulous craftsmanship required to create these devices, the steady hands and keen eyes needed to carve and shape the wood or metal components. These were not mass-produced items. Each was a unique creation, a testament to dedication. The refinement of water clocks was not merely an academic exercise. It had profound, practical implications for monastic life. With more accurate water clocks, the monks could schedule their prayer offices with greater confidence, ensuring they were performing their duties at the precise, divinely appointed times. This precision fostered a sense of spiritual discipline, and order within the community, reinforcing the very essence of monastic life. These improved water clocks also laid crucial groundwork for later mechanical clock developments. The concept of regulated, continuous movement, the use of floats and scales, and the pursuit of accuracy in measuring time all found their roots in these sophisticated clepsydrai. They were, in essence, the predecessors of the gears and escapements that would eventually dominate horology. The continuous, silent flow of water, once a symbol of the fluid, unmeasured passage of time, was now harnessed, controlled, and made to reveal the hidden hours of the day and night. The soft, rhythmic gurgle of the water clock would have been the auditory heartbeat of the monastery, a constant, reassuring presence in the otherwise silent halls. The journey from dripping water to the rhythmic tick-tock of a mechanical clock was a monumental leap, driven largely by the monastic quest for ultimate precision. You see, even the most refined water clocks, for all their ingenuity, still suffered from inherent limitations. Water could freeze in winter, evaporate in summer, and the flow rate could still be subtly affected by changes in humidity or even the accumulation of dust in the orifices. The monks, ever striving for perfection in their horarium, needed something more robust, more reliable, something that truly transcended the vagaries of nature. This is where the pivotal shift towards weight-driven mechanisms began, a fundamental innovation that would lay the very foundation for all modern mechanical clocks. Imagine the eureka moment, perhaps in a monastic workshop, when someone realized the simple, consistent force of gravity could be harnessed. Instead of water flowing, imagine a heavy stone or lead weight, suspended by a rope or chain, slowly descending. As this weight falls, its potential energy is converted into kinetic energy, providing a continuous and remarkably consistent power source. This was a game changer. Unlike water, a falling weight doesn't freeze or evaporate. Its descent is governed by the unchanging laws of physics, offering a level of reliability previously unattainable. The concept was straightforward. The weight would be attached to a drum or a series of gears, and as it descended, it would slowly turn these components. This continuous, predictable motion was precisely what was needed to drive a timekeeping device. Historians still argue whether the earliest designs for weight-driven mechanisms were directly inspired by similar concepts used in medieval hoisting devices, or if they emerged independently within horological experimentation. One quirky tidbit: the very first descriptions of weight-driven clocks sometimes referred to them as clocks with weights and wheels, emphasizing the revolutionary nature of this new power source. The implementation of weight-driven mechanisms wasn't without its challenges. How do you control the speed of the descending weight? If left unchecked, it would simply plummet to the floor, providing no meaningful timekeeping. This fundamental problem led directly to the invention of the escapement, which we'll delve into in the next section. But for now, focus on the sheer power and reliability of the falling weight. This new energy source allowed for the creation of clocks that were significantly larger and more robust than previous water or candle clocks. They could be placed in a central tower or a prominent location within the monastery, their presence a constant, visible reminder of the controlled march of time. The weight-driven mechanism was a testament to the medieval capacity for mechanical problem-solving. It moved beyond merely observing natural processes to actively engineering a controlled environment for timekeeping. It transformed time from an ephemeral, fluid concept into a tangible, measurable quantity literally driven by the steady pull of the earth. You can almost hear the soft, rhythmic groan of the gears and the gentle, inexorable descent of the weight, a powerful new heartbeat for the monastic day. This innovation was a direct response to the exacting demands of the Benedictine rule, proving that spiritual devotion could be a powerful catalyst for technological progress. The sheer mechanical advantage offered by weights allowed for more complex and larger systems, paving the way for the grand tower clocks that would eventually become fixtures of European cities. This shift away from ephemeral elements like water and fire towards the immutable force of gravity represented a profound intellectual and technological advancement, setting the stage for the true birth of mechanical horology. The falling weight was the silent, tireless workhorse, the engine that would drive the future of timekeeping. The invention of weight-driven mechanisms, as we just discussed, solved the problem of a consistent power source for clocks. However, it immediately presented another, even more critical challenge: how do you control the rate of descent of that heavy weight? If left unchecked, the weight would simply plummet to the ground, spinning the gears wildly and rendering the device useless for timekeeping. This fundamental problem led to one of the most ingenious and pivotal inventions in the history of horology. A true stroke of medieval genius, the escapement mechanism. Without the escapement, the mechanical clock, as we know it, simply would not exist. Imagine the problem: you have a powerful, constant force, the falling weight, and you need to translate that into a slow, measured, rhythmic movement. The escapement is, in essence, a brake and a release mechanism combined. It escapes a small amount of energy at regular, precise intervals, allowing the gear train to advance by a tiny, controlled amount. The earliest and most revolutionary escapement, developed in the late 13th or early 14th century, was the verge escapement with a foliot or balance wheel. Picture a vertical rod, the verge, with two small pallets or flags projecting from it. This verge is connected to a horizontal bar, the foliot, with adjustable weights at either end. As the weight-driven gear train turns, a toothed wheel, called the escape wheel, engages with the pallets on the verge. The escapement works by alternately catching and releasing a tooth of the escape wheel. One pallet catches a tooth, stopping the wheel. The momentum of the foliot then swings the verge, releasing that tooth and allowing the next pallet to catch the next tooth. This back and forth oscillation of the foliot, regulated by its inertia and the position of the weights, controlled the intermittent release of the escape wheel, thus regulating the entire clockwork. This was revolutionary. The foliot, by its oscillations, created the fundamental tick-tock of the mechanical clock, a rhythmic beat that marked the passage of discrete units of time. The ability to adjust the weights on the foliot allowed for fine-tuning of the clock's speed, a significant step towards accuracy. Historians still argue whether the verge escapement was primarily an adaptation of existing mechanical principles or a completely novel invention born from the specific demands of horology. One quirky tidbit: early foliot clocks were often quite inaccurate, sometimes losing or gaining as much as 15 minutes a day, but for medieval monastic purposes, even this was a vast improvement over previous methods. They weren't aiming for atomic clock precision. They were aiming for consistent hourly intervals. The development of the escapement meant that mechanical clocks could now maintain a consistent, measurable pace, independent of external factors like temperature or water levels. This transformed the potential of weight-driven mechanisms from mere toys into serious timekeeping instruments. The monastic workshops, where these innovations likely first took root, became crucibles of mechanical invention. The silence of the monastery, allowing for keen observation and focused work, would have been an ideal environment for such meticulous development. Imagine the monk, hunched over his workbench, adjusting tiny parts, listening intently to the tentative tick-tock of his creation, the sound of regulated time emerging from the interplay of wood and metal. The escapement was not just a clever piece of engineering, it was a conceptual breakthrough. It introduced the idea of feedback and regulation into mechanical systems, a principle that would become fundamental to countless future inventions, from steam engines to computers. The medieval monk, driven by the need to precisely mark the hours for prayer, had inadvertently laid the groundwork for a new era of mechanical precision and automation. The ticking sound of the escapement was the new heartbeat of the monastery, a steady, measured rhythm that resonated with the spiritual discipline of the community. It was a silent revolution, echoing through the stone walls, bringing a new order to the flow of time itself. With the fundamental principles of weight-driven power and the escapement mechanism now conceived, you can imagine the quiet hum of activity within the medieval monastery workshops, places far removed from the bustling markets or grand castles of the secular world. These were not factories, nor were they sterile laboratories. Instead, think of them as humble, often makeshift spaces, perhaps a corner of a scriptorium, a repurposed storeroom, or even a simple shed within the monastery grounds. These were the birthplaces of mechanical horology, where monks, driven by spiritual necessity and a profound practical ingenuity, began to translate abstract mechanical principles into tangible, working machines. The tools available to these early clockmakers were rudimentary by modern standards. You would have had access to basic hand tools: hammers, chisels, files, saws, and perhaps a simple drill. Metalworking would have involved forging iron, a laborious process, or perhaps casting bronze. Precision, as we understand it, was achieved through immense patience and meticulous handcraft rather than sophisticated machinery. Imagine a monk, possibly a lay brother with a talent for craftsmanship, hunched over a workbench, painstakingly filing a gear tooth, or carefully shaping a wooden component. The air might have been thick with the smell of sawdust, hot metal, and the faint scent of lamp oil. The silence, again, would have been a crucial element, allowing for intense concentration on the delicate work. Historians still argue whether the technical skills for early clockmaking were primarily developed within monasteries, or if they drew heavily on the existing knowledge of blacksmiths and millwrights. One quirky tidbit: some early monastic clockmakers were known to incorporate recycled materials, using old bell fragments for gear teeth or salvaged wood from broken carts for frames, showcasing a thrifty and resourceful approach to innovation. These early monastic workshops were crucibles of innovation, not because they had vast resources, but because they had an unwavering purpose to accurately tell time for the glory of God. This singular focus fostered an environment of experimentation and problem-solving. There was no market competition driving innovation. Instead, it was the internal demand for spiritual punctuality that fueled progress. The monks were both the designers and the end users, creating a feedback loop that allowed for continuous refinement. If a clock was inaccurate, the impact was felt immediately in the disruption of the monastic routine, providing a powerful incentive for improvement. The process of building an early mechanical clock would have been a monumental undertaking. First, you would need to cut the gears. These were often made of iron, but sometimes wood, especially for larger, less stressed wheels. Each tooth had to be carefully shaped to mesh smoothly with its counterpart, a task requiring incredible precision by hand. Then came the framework, often a sturdy iron cage or a wooden structure, designed to hold the gears and the escapement in alignment. The verge and folliot, critical for the escapement, would also require careful crafting, ensuring the pallets engage correctly with the escape wheel. Finally, the heavy weights would need to be fabricated, often from lead or stone, and the ropes or chains secured. The completion of such a machine would have been a triumph, a silent testament to human ingenuity and divine inspiration. The first mechanical clocks were not delicate wristwatches. They were large, robust, and sometimes noisy affairs, designed for functionality rather than aesthetic appeal. They were placed in central locations, often in the bell tower, their rhythmic clang or whirring mechanisms becoming a new, audible heartbeat of the monastery, a constant reminder of the regulated passage of time and the impending call to prayer. The monastery, typically a place of contemplative quiet, now resonated with the subtle sounds of these nascent machines, a mechanical echo of the devotion within. These were not just machines. They were sacred instruments, tools to help the monks fulfill their spiritual obligations with unwavering precision. As the monastic innovations in timekeeping grew, the term horologium began to encompass a broader concept than just a simple clock. For you, the medieval monk, the horologium wasn't merely a device that told time. It was an entire system, a grand apparatus designed to manage and announce the sacred hours of prayer. It was a multifaceted approach to timekeeping, integrating various technologies and human practices, all aimed at fulfilling the rigorous demands of the Benedictine rule. So, when someone referred to the monastery's horologium, they might be talking about a complex water clock, a newly installed weight-driven mechanical clock, or even the entire network of human bell ringers and watchmen that ensured the community was roused for matins. Imagine the complete horologium of a large, well-established monastery. It might include a sophisticated water clock, perhaps one of the refined constant pressure types, operating quietly in the cloisters, its rising float indicating the passage of hours during the day and night. Alongside this, you might have sundials strategically placed in courtyards, providing a visual check during daylight hours. But the true heart of the horologium, especially as mechanical clocks began to emerge, was the integration of automated signaling. This was where the alarm function truly came into its own, transforming time telling from a passive observation into an active call to action. Historians still argue whether the development of the monastic horologium as a holistic concept predated the invention of individual mechanical clock components, or if it evolved in parallel. One quirky tidbit: some monastic horologia were so complex that they even included astronomical dials, displaying the phases of the moon and the positions of the stars, further integrating celestial mechanics into the daily rhythm of the monastery. The core purpose of this broad horologium concept was to ensure the precise observance of the canonical hours. This meant not just knowing what time it was, but actively informing the entire community that it was time for prayer. Early mechanical clocks, therefore, were not just designed to tell time visually. They were built with the explicit purpose of announcing it audibly. This leads us directly to the concept of the automatic bell striker, a crucial component of the integrated horologium. The nascent gears and escapements of these early clocks were designed not just to move hands on a dial, which often didn't even exist yet, but to trigger a mechanism that would sound a bell. Think about the importance of sound in a pre-industrial, pre-electronic world. The clang of a bell could carry across fields, penetrate thick stone walls, and cut through the deepest sleep. It was the ultimate, unmistakable signal. Thus, the horologium wasn't complete without its auditory component. It wasn't about a gentle chime. It was often a resounding clang that would stir even the most stubbornly slumbering monk. The monastic horologium, therefore, represented a holistic approach to time management, integrating passive observation with active notification. It was a comprehensive system designed to synchronize an entire community, ensuring that every soul was aligned with the divine rhythm of prayer, day and night. This comprehensive vision of timekeeping, embracing multiple technologies and human roles, speaks volumes about the meticulous organization and spiritual dedication of medieval monastic life. The horologium was more than a machine. It was an embodiment of their spiritual commitment, a symphony of time and devotion orchestrated by human ingenuity. Having established the comprehensive concept of the horologium, you must now consider its most vital component, the primary alarm system for medieval monks, the bell. In a world without electronic buzzers, gentle melodies, or even easily visible clock faces, the resonant, penetrating sound of a bell was the ultimate signal, the unmistakable call to prayer that cut through the silence of the monastery, day or night. For centuries, long before mechanical clocks could strike automatically, the monastery's bells were rung by hand, a crucial duty performed by a designated monk. Imagine being roused from your sleep in the dead of winter, the air biting cold by the sudden, insistent clang of the bell from the abbey tower. It was not a polite suggestion, it was an imperative command. The bell was the voice of the horarium, a constant, authoritative presence dictating the flow of monastic life. Each office had its specific bell pattern, a unique rhythm or number of strikes that would communicate whether it was matins, lauds, vespers, or another canonical hour. You, as a monk, would have learned to interpret these auditory cues almost instinctively, your body and mind attuned to the monastery's sonic landscape. Historians still argue whether the precise bell-ringing patterns developed in monasteries influenced later secular town bell systems, or if there was a mutual exchange of acoustic signaling practices. One quirky tidbit: some monastic bells were so carefully crafted that their specific tones were believed to have spiritual significance, sometimes even being given individual names, as if they were members of the monastic community themselves. The responsibility for ringing the bells was a sacred trust, often assigned to the sacristan or another senior monk. This was a demanding duty, especially for the night offices. Picture the sacristan, sleep-deprived but diligent, making his way to the bell tower in the darkness, pulling the heavy ropes, and sending forth the resounding peals that would awaken his brethren. It required strength, precise timing, and an intimate knowledge of the bell schedules. A missed bell, or one rung inaccurately, could disrupt the entire monastic rhythm, a serious lapse in spiritual duty. This reliance on human bell ringers meant that the alarm function was entirely dependent on human vigilance and consistency, an often challenging task when battling sleep in the pre-dawn hours. The very design of medieval churches and monasteries often incorporated bell towers, not just for aesthetic appeal, but as integral parts of their functional design. The placement of the bells, their size, and the materials used were all chosen to maximize their auditory reach, ensuring that the call to prayer could be heard across the entire monastic precinct and even beyond, into nearby villages. The sound of the monastery bell became a defining feature of the medieval landscape, a powerful symbol of spiritual order and the regulated passage of time. This reliance on manually rung bells highlights the intense need for an automated solution. While effective, the human element introduced potential for error. A monk could oversleep, fall ill, or simply be late, throwing off the entire schedule. The drive to automate this critical function, to remove the fallibility of human intervention, was a powerful impetus behind the development of mechanical striking mechanisms. The bell, already established as the monastery's primary alarm, was simply waiting for the ingenious mechanical device that could ring it with tireless, unwavering precision. transforming it from a manual signal to an integral part of the emerging mechanical clockwork. The deep, resonant clang of the bell was not just a sound. It was the voice of God, calling you to your sacred duty, a sound that penetrated your very soul, even in the deepest slumber. Even with the development of sophisticated water clocks and the established role of the monastery bell, the earliest forms of monastic alarms often relied on an incredibly human and rather charming system, the human chain of awakening. Before mechanical striking mechanisms were widespread or entirely reliable, how did you ensure every monk was roused from their sleep for matins, often in the deepest, coldest part of the night? The answer was a direct, person-to-person relay, a testament to the community and shared responsibility that defined monastic life. Imagine this scenario: the sacristan, or perhaps the abbot himself, would be the first to awaken, likely prompted by a carefully timed water clock or an internal biological clock honed by years of discipline. He would then proceed to gently wake the next monk in the dormitory, perhaps with a soft tap on the shoulder, a whispered name, or a discreet cough. That awakened monk, in turn, would then rouse the next, and so on down the line. It was a silent, solemn, an incredibly effective system of peer accountability. You were not just waking yourself, you were responsible for waking your brother, ensuring the entire community was ready for their sacred duty. Historians still argue whether this human chain was a primary method for all monasteries, or if it served more as a backup system in communities with less developed mechanical horologia. One quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest that if a monk failed to wake his assigned brother, both might face minor penance, emphasizing the seriousness of this communal responsibility. This system, while seemingly low-tech, had several advantages. It was adaptable. If one monk was ill, another could easily take his place in the chain. It was resilient. A broken water clock wouldn't halt the entire monastic rhythm, and it reinforced the bonds of community, as monks literally relied on each other for their spiritual punctuality. There was a sense of shared purpose and mutual support embedded in this simple act of waking. The dormitory, usually a place of silent slumber, would briefly come alive with whispered movements and the subtle sounds of monks stirring, a quiet ripple of awakening spreading from bed to bed. However, the human chain also had its obvious drawbacks. It was susceptible to human error, fatigue, or illness. If the first monk in the chain overslept, or if someone in the middle fell back asleep, the entire sequence could be disrupted. The very human fallibility that mechanical clocks sought to overcome was at the heart of this system. It required immense discipline and dedication from every individual. You couldn't just hit a snooze button. Your responsibility extended to ensuring your brother's spiritual welfare. This reliance on a human chain highlights the profound need for a reliable, automated alarm. While effective, it was also demanding, placing a constant burden of vigilance on the monks. The desire to free individuals from this continuous watchfulness, to ensure an unblemished and unfailing call to prayer, was a powerful incentive for the development of the automated bell striker and other mechanical alarm mechanisms. The silent, almost ritualistic act of waking a fellow monk was a temporary solution, a stopgap, before the arrival of the mechanical marvels that would tirelessly and unerringly announce the arrival of each sacred hour, regardless of human fatigue or the chill of the monastic night. The quiet whispers and soft movements of the human chain would eventually give way to the resounding clang of the mechanical bell, a transition from human effort to tireless machine. The persistent demands of the monastic horarium, coupled with the inherent fallibility of human watchmen and the limitations of early timekeeping devices, propelled the medieval monks toward a crucial innovation, the mechanical bell striker. You see, it was one thing to know the time had passed. It was quite another to automate the resounding call to prayer. The ultimate alarm for the medieval monastery was the bell, and the genius lay in making the clock itself ring it. Imagine the frustration of a sacristan battling sleep, having to personally rouse himself, and then trudge to the bell tower, often in the freezing darkness of winter, just to pull a rope for matins. The vision of a machine that could perform this repetitive, demanding task with tireless precision must have been profoundly appealing. This is where the nascent mechanical clockwork, powered by falling weights and regulated by the escapement, found its true purpose beyond merely indicating time. It became an automated herald. The earliest mechanical bell strikers were ingeniously integrated with the clock's gear train. The basic principle was simple. A specific gear wheel within the clock mechanism would have a projection or pin on its circumference. As this wheel slowly rotated, driven by the falling weight, the pin would, at the precise designated hour, engage with a lever. This lever, in turn, was connected to a hammer, which would then swing and strike the monastery bell. Once the hammer struck, a spring or a counterweight would pull it back, ready for the next strike. The number of strikes could be controlled by a count wheel or snail mechanism, ensuring that the bell struck the correct number of times for each canonical hour. So, for matins it might strike a specific number of times, and for louds, a different count. Historians still argue whether the concept of the mechanical bell striker evolved directly from earlier automata, like those found in ancient Greek or Roman theatres, or if it was an entirely novel monastic invention. One quirky tidbit: some early monastic bell strikers were designed to strike figures of monks or angels, adding a visual, almost theatrical element to the auditory alarm. This invention was nothing short of revolutionary for monastic life. It transformed the bell from a manually operated signal into an integral part of an automated system. The monk no longer had to rely solely on his own vigilance. The machine became the tireless, unwavering servant of the divine schedule. This freed up monastic resources, allowing monks to focus more on their spiritual duties rather than the arduous task of timekeeping. The very sound of the bell, once a symbol of human effort, now became a testament to mechanical precision, a constant, rhythmic presence in the monastery, signaling the passage of each sacred hour with unerring accuracy. The creation of these mechanical bell strikers required significant craftsmanship. The gears had to be robust enough to withstand the forces involved in swinging a hammer. The levers and pins had to be precisely aligned to ensure reliable engagement. It was a complex interplay of forces and mechanics, all culminating in that distinct, resonant clang that announced the call to prayer. The monastery, typically a bastion of quiet contemplation, now had a new, powerful voice, a metallic echo of its spiritual purpose. The tireless, unwavering clang of the mechanical bell became the definitive alarm, a sound that left no room for ambiguity, ensuring that every monk was roused to fulfill their sacred vows, even in the deepest, most tempting slumber. The mechanical bell striker was not just an alarm, it was a tireless priest, performing its duty with unwavering devotion, ensuring the monastic rhythm remained unbroken. Before the full development of sophisticated, weight-driven mechanical clocks, with their intricate escapements and bell-striking mechanisms, medieval monastic ingenuity often looked to existing power sources to automate tasks. You've seen how water clocks evolved for continuous timekeeping. But what about using moving water for an actual alarm? Indeed, some of the earliest attempts at automated awakening systems in monasteries harnessed the power of water wheels, a remarkably clever adaptation of existing technology. Imagine a stream or a diverted channel of water flowing near the monastery. The power of this flowing water could be used to turn a small water wheel. This principle was already well understood for grinding grain or driving bellows. The innovation lay in connecting this rotary motion to a signaling device. Picture a water wheel, perhaps just a few feet in diameter, turning slowly but consistently. Attached to its axle or to one of its spokes might be a series of pegs or cams. As the wheel rotated, these pegs would, at predetermined intervals, lift a lever. This lever, in turn, could be connected to a small hammer designed to strike a bell or a gong. The sound produced wouldn't have been as grand as the main abbey bell, but it would have been sufficient to rouse a nearby monk or a small group. Historians still argue whether these water wheel-driven alarms were common or if they were highly localized innovations, dependent on specific geographical features. One quirky tidbit: some very early versions of these alarms were essentially glorified trip hammers, where the water wheel simply lifted a heavy mallet that would then fall under its own weight onto a resonant surface, creating a loud thud rather than a clear bell tone. The beauty of the water wheel-driven alarm lay in its simplicity and its continuous operation. As long as the water flowed, the wheel would turn, and the alarm mechanism would cycle. This offered a reliable, if somewhat imprecise, method of signaling without constant human intervention. It freed a monk from the perpetual vigilance required to watch a water clock or rely on a human chain. This was automation on a rudimentary but effective level, a testament to the monk's ability to adapt existing technologies to their specific needs. The challenges, of course, were also apparent. The flow of water could vary seasonally, affecting the speed of the wheel and thus the accuracy of the alarm. freezing temperatures in winter would render the system completely inoperable. Furthermore, these systems were inherently localized, requiring a reliable water source directly adjacent to the monastery. Not every monastery had such a convenient natural asset. Nevertheless, for those that did, a water wheel-driven alarm offered a significant step towards automating the monastic horarium. These early water-powered alarms were precursors to more complex mechanical systems. They demonstrated the concept of converting continuous motion into intermittent, timed signals, a principle that would become central to the development of escapements and self-striking clocks. They represented a bridge between the purely naturalistic timekeeping methods and the eventual dominance of full mechanical horology. The gentle, rhythmic churn of the water wheel, accompanied by the occasional clang of its hammer, would have been another subtle yet constant reminder of the ordered flow of time within the monastic enclosure. It was a tangible link between the power of nature and the precise demands of the divine schedule, a clever piece of engineering born from the quiet ingenuity of medieval monastic life. The whisper of the water, the grind of the wheel, and the sudden clang of the hammer, these were the sounds of the early automated awakening, a testament to a world learning to tame the elements for spiritual discipline. Building upon the conceptual leap of weight-driven power, the medieval monks took the next logical step in automating their alarms, applying this consistent, reliable force directly to the act of bell ringing. You saw how the mechanical bell striker emerged as a vital component of the monastic horologium, and it was the falling weight that truly brought it to life. This was the moment when the force of gravity, an omnipresent but previously unharnessed power, became the tireless servant of the monastic schedule. Imagine the simple elegance of it. Instead of a monk pulling a rope, a heavy lead or stone weight, slowly descending, provided the motive force. This weight, attached to a rope or chain, would be wound up, often daily, by a monk. As it gradually dropped, it turned a series of gears. These gears, meticulously crafted in the monastic workshop, were specifically designed to interact with the bell-striking mechanism. At the designated hour, a trip lever or pin on one of the larger wheels would engage with a hammer arm, lifting it. As the pin released, the hammer would fall under its own weight, striking the bell with a resounding clang. This was precisely the same principle that would power the timekeeping mechanism, but now applied specifically to the alarm function. Historians still argue whether the weight-driven bell-striking mechanisms were developed concurrently with the time-telling gears, or if the need for an automated alarm was the primary driver for perfecting the weight system. One quirky tidbit: some early monastic descriptions of these systems emphasized the tireless nature of the falling weight, almost anthropomorphizing it as a devoted servant performing its sacred duty without complaint. The advantages of weight power for bell ringing were immense. Firstly, consistency. Unlike human bell ringers, a falling weight does not tire, does not fall ill, and does not oversleep. It delivers its power with unwavering regularity, ensuring the bell is struck with consistent force and at the precise moment dictated by the clockwork. Secondly, power. A sufficiently heavy weight could strike a large monastery bell with considerable force, ensuring the sound carried far and wide, effectively waking the entire community. Thirdly, reliability. As long as the weight was wound up, the system would operate, relatively immune to environmental factors that plagued water clocks. This innovation transformed the monastic bell from a manually operated signal into a truly automated alarm. The solemn clang of the bell, once a testament to human vigilance, now became a powerful symbol of mechanical precision, echoing through the monastery with tireless regularity. It reinforced the sense of order and discipline that was central to monastic life, ensuring that prayer offices were observed with unfailing punctuality. The sound was no longer dependent on a sleepy monk. It was the inevitable consequence of gravity and gears, a relentless call to duty. The very scale of these early weight-driven bell systems speaks to their importance. The weights themselves could be quite massive, requiring sturdy frameworks and considerable effort to wind. This was not a delicate mechanism, but a robust, powerful one, designed to perform a vital function day in and day out, year after year. The deep, resonant sound of the monastery bell, powered by the simple force of a falling weight, became the defining sound of the monastic routine, an omnipresent reminder of the sacred duties that awaited each monk, regardless of the hour. It was the ultimate medieval alarm clock, a testament to the ingenious way monks adapted the laws of physics to serve their spiritual purpose, a silent, powerful descent culminating in a resounding, unavoidable call. The magic of those weight-powered bell-striking mechanisms, and indeed of all early mechanical clocks, lay in the intricate dance of early geared systems. You might think of gears as modern marvels of engineering, but their fundamental principles were understood and applied in surprisingly sophisticated ways in medieval monastic workshops. Without these rudimentary gears, the continuous, slow descent of a weight could never be translated into the precisely timed, intermittent actions needed to strike a bell or to move a hand on a dial. Imagine a series of intermeshing toothed wheels, each perfectly cut and aligned. The largest wheel, often connected directly to the drum around which the weight's rope was wound, would turn slowly under the steady pull of gravity. This slow rotation then had to be accelerated and transferred to other components. This is where the magic of gearing comes in. A large gear meshing with a smaller gear will cause the smaller gear to rotate more quickly. By carefully selecting the number of teeth on each wheel, the medieval clockmaker could achieve precise ratios of speed and power transfer. This allowed them to take the slow, powerful movement of the main weight and translate it into the faster, more rapid movements needed for the escapement to regulate the clock's pace, and crucially, for the hammer to strike the bell with sufficient force and speed. Historians still argue whether the inspiration for early clock gears came from the practical applications of mill machinery or from more theoretical studies of ancient Greek automata. One quirky tidbit: early clock gears were often made of wood, particularly for the larger wheels, with individually carved teeth, which speaks to the immense skill and patience of the monastic artisans. The construction of these early gears was a monumental undertaking. Each tooth had to be meticulously cut and shaped by hand. Inaccuracies in even a single tooth could lead to friction, jamming, or inconsistent movement, throwing off the entire clock's precision. Picture a monk, perhaps the community's resident craftsman, spending hours, days, even weeks, filing and smoothing each tooth, ensuring a perfect mesh. This wasn't assembly line production. It was a bespoke, artisanal process. The materials used were often iron, hammered and forged, or carefully selected hardwood. The challenge was not just cutting the gears, but ensuring their precise alignment within the clock's framework, often an open cage of iron or wood. These early geared systems were the mechanical brains of the monastic alarm clocks. They were responsible for counting the oscillations of the escapement, accumulating the time, and then, at the precise moment, releasing the energy to strike the bell. The count wheel mechanism, which determined the number of times the bell would strike for each hour, was also an ingenious application of gearing, ensuring the correct number of chimes for each canonical hour. This required a level of mechanical understanding that was truly advanced for the medieval period. The quiet whirring and clicking of these early gears, as they slowly turned, would have been the internal whisper of the monastic horologium, a constant, subtle reminder of the passage of time. They were the invisible workforce, tirelessly translating the raw power of gravity into the precise, rhythmic movements that govern the monastic day. These early geared systems, born from the spiritual need for precise punctuality, represented a profound leap in mechanical engineering, setting the stage for the intricate clockworks that would eventually define the modern era. The quiet, consistent grinding of the gears was the true, unsung sound of the medieval alarm clock, the tireless heart of the machine, while the grand, resounding clang of the monastery bell was the primary alarm. The medieval monks, with their characteristic ingenuity and devotion to precise timekeeping, also explored more subtle and fascinating methods of marking the hours, particularly for specific tasks or individual use. One such quirky innovation was the concept of automated candle extinguishers, a clever adaptation of the candle clock that transformed a passive time indicator into a subtle, self-acting alarm. You've already seen how marked candles served as rudimentary timekeepers, burning down to indicate elapsed hours. The limitation, of course, was that they merely showed the time. They didn't actively signal it. The idea behind the automated candle extinguisher was to add that crucial alarm function. Imagine a candle marked for a specific duration, perhaps an hour of reading or an hour of prayer. At the corresponding mark, a small, cleverly designed mechanism would douse the flame. This could be as simple as a spring-loaded arm with a snuffer, or perhaps a small weight attached to a thread that would melt as the candle burned down, releasing a pin that allowed a snuffer to drop. Historians still argue whether these automated candle extinguishers were widespread or if they were niche inventions used only by particularly diligent monks or in specific workshops. One quirky tidbit, some very elaborate designs even incorporated a small, heat-sensitive lever that, when triggered by the candle flame reaching a certain point, would release a tiny amount of water to extinguish the wick with a hiss, adding an element of surprise. The beauty of these devices lay in their simplicity and their quiet efficiency. They wouldn't wake an entire dormitory, but they would provide a direct, unmistakable signal to an individual monk that a specific time period had elapsed. This was particularly useful for personal study, meditation, or specific manual tasks that required a set duration. Imagine a monk engrossed in copying a manuscript in the dimly lit scriptorium. He sets his candle clock, and then, with a subtle click or a soft hiss, the flame is extinguished, signaling the end of his allotted time for that task. It was a gentle, yet firm, reminder, far less jarring than a ringing bell, perfectly suited for the quiet contemplative life. These automated candle extinguishers required meticulous craftsmanship. The mechanism had to be light enough not to interfere with the candle's burn rate, yet robust enough to reliably extinguish the flame. The timing had to be precise, ensuring the snuffer engaged at the exact moment the flame reached the designated mark. It was a miniature piece of automation, a silent servant of punctuality, designed to enhance individual discipline within the broader monastic schedule. While perhaps not as impactful as the mechanical bell, these small, personal alarms speak volumes about the pervasive need for timekeeping in monastic life, extending even to individual activities. They demonstrate the monk's willingness to experiment and innovate with readily available materials, adapting them to create practical solutions for everyday monastic challenges. The quiet snuffing of a flame, a small but significant moment, would have been a constant, subtle reminder of the ordered flow of time, guiding the monk through his duties, one precisely measured interval at a time, a testament to the ingenuity of a world without digital timers or vibrating watches. The gentle whisper of the flame dying, a quiet goodbye to the passing hour, was a unique form of medieval alarm, a subtle nudge rather than a forceful shout. Beyond the grand, communal alarms of bells and the individual signals of automated candle extinguishers, medieval monks, with their relentless drive for precise timekeeping, also developed ingenious systems that leveraged the properties of water to indicate specific prayer times. These weren't necessarily alarm clocks in the sense of striking a bell, but rather sophisticated water-level indicators that provided a clear, visible, and often audible cue for the monastery. Imagine a large, ornate water clock, perhaps one of the refined constant pressure types, situated in a prominent location within the monastery, like the chapter house or the cloister. This wasn't just about the water dripping from one vessel to another. Instead, these devices might have incorporated intricate internal mechanisms tied to the rising or falling water level. For example, as water slowly filled a receiving chamber, a float connected to a vertical rod would rise. This rod could then interact with a series of small, precisely placed pins or levers at specific heights, each corresponding to a canonical hour. When the float reached a particular height, the pin would trigger a small, subtle action. This could be as simple as revealing a written word for the prayer office, or perhaps releasing a small weight that would cause a gentle tap on a metal plate, producing a soft, discrete sound. Historians still argue whether the sophistication of these water-level indicators was primarily driven by monastic needs, or if they drew on earlier classical Roman hydraulic engineering principles. One quirky tidbit: some very elaborate water clocks even incorporated small, sculpted figures that would move or pour water from their mouths as the water level reached a certain point, creating a fascinating visual spectacle to mark the hours. The elegance of these water-level indicators lay in their continuous, silent operation. There was no jarring clang, no sudden disruption. Instead, the passage of time was marked by the gradual, inexorable rise or fall of water, culminating in a subtle, yet unmistakable, signal. This allowed for a more contemplative awareness of the hours, particularly beneficial for monks engaged in silent study or meditation. You could glance at the indicator and see exactly how much time remained until the next office, or when a specific spiritual exercise was due to begin. The rhythmic, almost imperceptible gurgle and splash of the water would have been a constant, soothing backdrop to monastic life, a living representation of time's flow. These devices required incredibly precise craftsmanship. The vessels had to be perfectly formed, the orifices carefully calibrated to ensure a consistent flow rate. The floats had to be weighted just right to move smoothly, and the pins or levers had to be positioned with meticulous accuracy. Any deviation would lead to inaccurate readings and disrupt the carefully planned monastic schedule. The very act of observing these water levels, of seeing the hours literally emerge from the rising water, would have been a meditative practice in itself, reinforcing the monks' deep connection to the passage of time and their spiritual duties. While not alarms in the modern sense of a loud, attention-grabbing sound, these water level indicators served a crucial function in the monastic horologium. They provided continuous, visual confirmation of the hours, supplementing the periodic ringing of bells and ensuring that the monks were always aware of their precise position within the divine cycle of prayer. They were a testament to the monks' dedication to measuring time with every tool at their disposal, transforming the simple element of water into a precise and profound instrument for spiritual discipline. The quiet, almost magical movement of the water and the subtle reveal of the hour were a profound counterpoint to the later, louder mechanical alarms, a unique expression of medieval ingenuity. You've seen how medieval monks ingeniously harnessed water for timekeeping and bells for alarms. But a more fundamental, pervasive force underpinned many of their greatest mechanical innovations: gravity. The simple, omnipresent pull of the earth became the tireless, unwavering engine for their earliest and most effective alarm clocks. Understanding gravity's role is key to appreciating how these devices functioned without electricity or complex power sources. Imagine the sheer practicality of it. You hang a heavy stone or lead weight from a rope, and it wants to fall. This inherent tendency to descend provides a constant, reliable force. The challenge, of course, was to control this descent, to make it slow and measured rather than a chaotic plummet. This is where the genius of the medieval monks, often overlooked in the grand narrative of scientific progress, truly shines. They understood that if this falling weight could be slowed and regulated, it could power virtually any mechanism. Consider the very first weight-driven clocks, the direct ancestors of our modern timepieces. The heavy weight, suspended by a chain or rope, was the primary power source. As it descended, it rotated a main barrel or drum. This rotation, through a series of gears, then powered the escapement, which we discussed earlier. The escapement, in turn, regulated the rate of the weight's fall, ensuring it dropped at a consistent, measurable speed. So, the clock wasn't just measuring time. It was powered by the very force that defines our perception of time on Earth. Historians still argue whether the understanding of gravity's consistent force was primarily empirical, based on observation of falling objects, or if there was a deeper theoretical understanding that fueled its application in horology. One quirky tidbit: some early monastic clock weights were shaped like specific religious symbols, such as crosses or bells, infusing even the mundane mechanics with spiritual meaning. This harnessing of gravity was a monumental step forward from earlier timekeeping methods. Water clocks, for instance, relied on maintaining constant pressure, which was always susceptible to variations. Candle clocks were inherently inaccurate due to burn rates and drafts. But gravity, in its unchanging constancy, offered a precision and reliability previously unattainable. The continuous, silent pull of the earth became the ultimate, tireless power source for the monastery's timekeeping apparatus. It was a discovery that allowed for truly automated and enduring systems. The same principle applied directly to the alarm function. The mechanical bell strikers, as you recall, were also powered by gravity. A separate weight, or sometimes the same main weight, would drive a specific part of the gear train that, at the appointed hour, would release a hammer to strike the bell. The energy for that resonant clang came directly from the potential energy stored in the elevated weight. When you hear the clunk of an old grandfather clock's weights dropping, you are hearing the very echo of medieval monastic innovation, a direct lineage back to those early designs. The monks didn't just invent clocks. They pioneered the practical application of fundamental physics. Their need for precise timekeeping for spiritual purposes pushed them to observe, understand, and then exploit the natural forces around them. Gravity became their silent, tireless servant, ensuring that the call to prayer, the very heartbeat of the monastic day, was never missed. This reliance on gravity made their alarm clocks remarkably robust and self-sufficient, requiring only the periodic winding of the weights. It was a profound and lasting contribution to the mechanical arts, a testament to how practical necessity can lead to groundbreaking scientific and engineering insights. The slow, relentless descent of the weight, a visible symbol of time's passage, was the quiet, powerful force that brought order and precision to the medieval monastic night. Having explored the individual components and principles, it's time to bring them together and specifically focus on the alarum clocks themselves, those ingenious medieval devices designed not just to tell time, but to actively rouse you, the monk, from slumber or signal a critical moment of prayer. These were the true ancestors of your smartphone alarm, though considerably louder and less customizable. The earliest alarum clocks, emerging in the 14th century, were direct descendants of the weight-driven mechanical clocks we've been discussing. They were essentially mechanical clocks with an added mechanism specifically for signaling. You wouldn't find a gently vibrating wristband or a pleasant melody. Instead, the alarm was designed to be unmistakable, often a harsh, insistent sound, typically produced by a hammer striking a small bell or a resonant metal plate. Imagine the raw, unrefined sound of metal on metal, designed to cut through the quiet of the monastery and the depths of your sleep. The core of the alarum mechanism involved a separate, smaller gear train, often driven by its own dedicated falling weight. This gear train would be engaged by a pin or a lever on the main timekeeping mechanism at a preset time. Once engaged, the alarm mechanism would rapidly release its stored energy, causing a hammer to strike a bell repeatedly and forcefully. The duration of the alarm could vary, from a few sharp clangs to a sustained burst of sound, designed to ensure no monk remained in their bed. Historians still argue whether the earliest alarum clocks were developed primarily for monastic use, or if their invention was a more widespread phenomenon in burgeoning urban centers. One quirky tidbit: some very early alarum clocks didn't have a visual dial at all. Their sole purpose was to sound the alarm at a specific, preset time, making them truly dedicated alarm machines rather than time-telling devices. Setting the alarm was a manual process, often involving rotating a small disc or pointer on the clock face to the desired hour. When the main timekeeping mechanism reached that point, it would trigger the alarm train. This was a significant leap from relying on a human watchman or the subtle cues of water levels. The alarum clock was tireless, unfeeling, and utterly dedicated to its singular purpose, ensuring punctuality for prayer. These alarum clocks represented a profound shift. Time was no longer just something to be observed. It was something to be actively commanded and announced. The monastery, with its strict horarium, became the primary proving ground for these devices. The need to rise for matins in the darkest hours of the night was the driving force behind their development. It was an invention born out of spiritual discipline and the relentless pursuit of order. The sound of the alarum clock, echoing through the monastic halls, would have been a powerful presence. It was a constant reminder of the spiritual duties that awaited, a sharp break from the comfort of sleep, propelling the monks into the solemnity of prayer. These were not just machines. They were instruments of spiritual governance, enforcing the rigid schedule with unwavering mechanical precision. The clanging, whirring, and ticking of these devices transformed the medieval monastery into a finely tuned, meticulously timed spiritual machine, all thanks to the ingenious design of these early alarum clocks, ensuring that even in the deepest sleep, the call to prayer was heard and heeded. A testament to the power of a mechanical wake-up call. While you might think of medieval monks as solely focused on earthly devotions and mechanical crafts, their understanding of time was also deeply intertwined with the cosmos. The monastic daily rhythm, in fact, was profoundly influenced by astronomical considerations. You see, the canonical hours, the fixed times for prayer, were originally conceived in relation to the rising and setting of the sun and the positions of celestial bodies. Therefore, integrating astronomical observations into their timekeeping was not just an academic pursuit. It was a fundamental aspect of their spiritual practice. Imagine a clear medieval night in the monastery. A monk, perhaps with a keen interest in the heavens, would gaze upwards, identifying familiar constellations. The movement of the stars across the night sky provided a natural, albeit rough, clock. Polaris, the North Star, remained fixed, while other constellations, like the Big Dipper or Ursa Major, rotated around it, acting as immense, cosmic clock hands. By observing the position of certain stars, you could estimate the time with a degree of accuracy. This was particularly important for determining the timing of matins and lauds, which occurred in the pre-dawn hours. Historians still argue whether the astronomical knowledge of medieval monks was primarily inherited from classical texts, or if significant new observations were made within monastic communities. One quirky tidbit: some monastic calendars even calculated the precise times for sunrise and sunset for specific holy days, incorporating detailed astronomical data to ensure the most accurate observance of liturgical practices. Beyond simple observation, some of the more sophisticated monastic horologia, particularly in larger or wealthier abbeys, incorporated astronomical dials into their design. These were not just simple clock faces with hour hands. Instead, they might display the phases of the moon, the positions of the sun and moon in the zodiac, or even the movement of certain planets. These astronomical clocks were incredibly complex machines, combining precise gearing with a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. They served not just to tell time, but to provide a comprehensive, visual representation of the cosmos, aligning the earthly monastic rhythm with the divine order of the universe. The ability to predict astronomical events, such as the equinoxes and solstices, was crucial for determining the dates of important religious festivals, particularly Easter, which is tied to the lunar calendar. Monastic scholars meticulously calculated these dates, and their astronomical instruments, including sophisticated astrolabes and later, complex clocks, aided them in this vital task. The horologium, therefore, was not merely a mechanical device. It was often a miniature cosmos in itself, a reflection of the larger celestial clockwork. This integration of astronomical knowledge speaks to the breadth of monastic learning and ingenuity. Monks were not isolated from the scientific currents of their time. They were often at the forefront of observation and calculation. Their spiritual quest for order and precision extended from the smallest gear in a clock to the grand movements of the heavens. The monastery, with its silent halls and open courtyards, became a nexus where earthly mechanics met celestial mechanics, all in service of a divinely ordained schedule. The deep, almost spiritual connection to the cosmos, reflected in their timekeeping, reminds you that for medieval monks, time was not just a human construct. It was a reflection of God's eternal order, manifested in the predictable dance of the stars and planets, and meticulously tracked by their ingenious, heaven-gazing machines. For all their ingenuity and groundbreaking innovations, medieval monastic alarm clocks, despite being revolutionary for their era, were far from perfectly accurate by our modern standards. You see, the precision we take for granted with our quartz watches and atomic clocks was simply unattainable with the materials and technologies available in the Middle Ages. Understanding these limitations is crucial to fully appreciate the monks' achievements. Imagine trying to achieve pinpoint accuracy with hand-forged iron gears, crudely cut by hand, and a foliate escapement that swung with inherent friction. The earliest mechanical clocks, particularly those incorporating alarm functions, were often quite variable. Daily variations of 15 to 30 minutes were not uncommon, and over a week they could easily drift by an hour or more. Temperature fluctuations, humidity, and even the dust and grime that inevitably accumulated in the open gear trains could all affect their performance. There was no standardized manufacturing. Each clock was a unique, bespoke creation with its own quirks and idiosyncrasies. Historians still argue whether the initial tolerance for inaccuracy in early mechanical clocks stemmed from a philosophical acceptance of natural variation or simply from the technological limitations of the era. One quirky tidbit to compensate for cumulative inaccuracies: some monasteries employed a clock master who would manually reset the main clock several times a day, often by observing a sundial at midday, effectively acting as a human fine-tuner. The escapement mechanism, while a stroke of genius, was also a source of imprecision. The verge and foliate, with their inherent friction and irregular swings, simply couldn't achieve the consistent oscillations of later pendulum or balance wheel designs. The weight powering the clock also had its own issues. As the rope unwound, the diameter of the winding barrel would change slightly, potentially altering the torque, and the quality of the rope or chain itself could introduce inconsistencies. There were no ball bearings to reduce friction. Metal scraped against metal, wood against wood, creating drag that varied as parts wore down. Furthermore, the very concept of a universal, standardized hour was still evolving. Medieval hours were often temporal, meaning they varied in length with the seasons. Daylight hours were divided into 12 hours and nighttime hours into 12 hours. This meant a daylight hour in summer was longer than a daylight hour in winter. While some monastic clocks transitioned to equal, equinoctial hours, this variability added another layer of complexity to their design and maintenance. You weren't aiming for a precise 60 minutes. You were aiming for a proportionate division of the available daylight or darkness. Despite these significant limitations, the medieval monastic alarm clock was a profound leap forward. Its value wasn't necessarily in atomic precision, but in its consistency and automation. Even if it drifted by half an hour over the course of a day, it drifted predictably, and it reliably struck the alarm at roughly the correct interval, freeing monks from constant vigilance. It provided a rhythmic, ordered structure to their lives that was previously impossible. The daily grind of the monastery, the demands of the horarium, meant that even an imperfect automated system was vastly superior to constant human oversight. The subtle whirring, clicking, and periodic clanging of these early machines, though lacking modern accuracy, were the sounds of a revolution, a testament to the persistent human drive to tame time, even with rudimentary tools, ensuring that the divine call to prayer was never missed, even if it was a few minutes early or late by our standards. The technological breakthroughs in timekeeping and alarm mechanisms, painstakingly developed within the quiet, ordered world of medieval monasteries, were simply too profound to remain confined within abbey walls. You see, the innovations in weight-driven clocks, escapements, and automated bell striking were not just monastic curiosities. They were fundamental advancements that would inevitably spill out and influence the wider secular world. The spread of monastic horology, from its humble origins to its eventual widespread adoption, marks a crucial chapter in the history of technology. Imagine the sheer utility of these machines. If a monastery could regulate its prayers with such precision, imagine the benefits for a bustling medieval town. Merchants needed to open and close their markets at consistent times. Artisans needed to regulate their workdays. Churches in burgeoning towns needed to announce mass, funerals, and other important civic events. The concept of standardized time, initially driven by monastic spiritual discipline, found powerful secular applications. One of the primary ways monastic horology spread was through the simple act of observation and imitation. Townspeople, lords, and scholars would visit monasteries, witness the marvel of a mechanical clock striking the hour automatically, and instantly recognize its immense potential. Skilled artisans, perhaps trained by monks or observing their work, began to adapt these designs for secular purposes. The transition was often facilitated by the patronage of wealthy individuals or civic authorities who desired similar impressive and functional clocks for their town halls or cathedrals. These public clocks, often placed in prominent towers, quickly became symbols of civic pride and technological advancement. Historians still argue whether the demand for secular clocks primarily spurred the refinement of monastic designs, or if monastic innovation simply created a supply for an existing, latent demand. One quirky tidbit: some early secular town clocks were so impressive that they became tourist attractions, drawing visitors from far and wide to witness their intricate movements and automated striking figures. The expertise in clockmaking, initially concentrated in monastic workshops, gradually diffused throughout Europe. Monks, acting as master craftsmen, might be commissioned to build clocks for secular patrons. Lay artisans, seeing the demand, would learn the trade, either through apprenticeship or by reverse engineering existing monastic clocks. This process led to the establishment of secular clockmaking guilds and workshops, particularly in urban centers known for their mechanical arts. Cities like Florence, Paris, and later Nuremberg and Augsburg became centers of clock production, building upon the foundations laid in the monasteries. The impact was transformative. Public clocks brought a new level of temporal order to daily life. People began to live by the clock, rather than solely by the sun. This led to increased coordination, more efficient trade, and a more structured social fabric. The medieval monks' meticulous pursuit of spiritual punctuality had inadvertently laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution, where precise timing and synchronized labor would become paramount. The silent, rhythmic tick of the monastery clock, once heard only by a few devoted souls, now echoed through the market squares and civic centers of Europe, a testament to the far-reaching influence of an innovation born from devotion and practical genius. The very concept of time as a measurable, uniform quantity, a cornerstone of modern life, can trace its lineage directly back to the monastic drive to ring the bell on time for matins, demonstrating how a specialized need can ignite a technological wildfire. The echoes of medieval monastic alarm clocks resonate profoundly in your daily life, in ways you might not immediately realize. You see, the fundamental principles, and even some specific design elements, pioneered within those quiet monastery walls, laid the direct groundwork for every alarm clock you've ever used. From the clunky wind up beside your childhood bed to the sleek digital interface on your smartphone. The legacy of monastic horology is truly pervasive. Consider the very concept of an automated, timed signal designed to rouse you. That's the essence of an alarm clock. The monks, needing to be woken for matins in the darkest hours, invented this necessity. The weight-driven mechanisms ensuring consistent power, the escapement regulating the flow of time, the gears translating power and motion, and critically, the mechanical bell striker, providing that undeniable auditory cue. These are the foundational elements of every mechanical alarm clock that followed. Your bedside alarm, with its winding key and dual bells, is a direct, miniaturized descendant of those towering monastic machines. Historians still argue whether the aesthetic appeal of later alarm clocks, with their decorative cases and elaborate dials, represents a significant departure from monastic functionalism, or if it's simply a natural evolution of mechanical art. One quirky tidbit: the term alarm itself, derived from the Old French alarm meaning to arms, reflects its original purpose as a military signal, later adopted by timekeeping devices for its urgent, attention-grabbing connotation. Even in our digital age, the principles persist. When your smartphone alarm vibrates or plays a melody, it's still performing the same function as the medieval bell striker, providing a predetermined, automated signal at a specific time. The internal clock of your device, whether quartz or atomic, is merely a far more refined version of the escapement and gear train, designed for incredible precision. The programming that sets the alarm and triggers the sound is the digital equivalent of the monk manually setting the hour on a dial, and the physical trip lever activating the hammer. The monastic pursuit of accuracy, born from spiritual discipline, also drove the continuous improvement of timekeeping. The desire for a more precise escapement, a more reliable power source, and a more robust construction, all stemming from monastic needs, directly contributed to the centuries of innovation that led to the highly accurate timekeeping we enjoy today. Without the monastic impetus, the development of precision clockwork might have been significantly delayed. They were the pioneers who understood that timing wasn't just about convenience. It was about order, discipline, and ultimately control. So, the next time your alarm jolts you awake, take a moment to consider its remarkable lineage. From the heavy lead weights slowly descending in a medieval monastery tower to the silent buzz of your modern device, the intention remains the same: to command your attention at a precise moment. It's a testament to the enduring impact of those anonymous medieval monks, whose innovative minds, driven by a profound spiritual purpose, laid the very foundation for the machines that continue to shape the rhythms of our modern lives. The persistent, demanding call of your alarm clock is a direct, unbroken chain from the clang of the medieval monastery bell, a reminder of a quiet revolution that continues to resonate today. In the grand tapestry of scientific and technological advancement, medieval monks often stand as unsung heroes. You might typically associate the Middle Ages with darkness and stagnation, but as we've explored, the monastic communities were, in many respects, vibrant centers of innovation, particularly in the realm of mechanical arts. They were not merely custodians of ancient knowledge. They were active researchers, experimenters, and engineers, pushing the boundaries of what was technologically possible. Consider their role as early automated system designers. The need to accurately mark the canonical hours, especially matins in the dead of night, compelled them to develop mechanisms that could operate autonomously and reliably. This wasn't about intellectual curiosity for its own sake, but about solving a profound practical and spiritual problem. The development of weight-driven clocks, the invention of the escapement, the creation of mechanical bell strikers, these were not accidental discoveries. They were the result of focused effort, iterative design, and hands-on experimentation within the monastery workshops. They were, in essence, the Silicon Valleys of the medieval world, albeit with significantly less venture capital and more vows of poverty. Historians still argue whether the monastic emphasis on routine and order naturally fostered technological innovation, or if the concentration of intellectual capital within monasteries simply created an environment conducive to problem-solving. One quirky tidbit: some monastic libraries contain detailed diagrams and descriptions of mechanical devices, serving as early forms of engineering manuals, meticulously copied and preserved for future generations of artisans. The monks' contributions weren't limited to horology. They also refined agricultural techniques, developed innovative water management systems, and contributed significantly to the fields of optics and medicine. Their motivation was often intertwined with their spiritual mission. For example, efficient agricultural practices allowed them to feed their communities and fulfill their duties of charity. Accurate timekeeping, as we've seen, was directly linked to their core spiritual practice of prayer. This blend of practical necessity and spiritual devotion proved to be a powerful catalyst for invention. The monasteries provided a unique environment for this kind of work. They offered stability, resources however modest, and a community of individuals dedicated to learning and craftsmanship. The silence and routine fostered concentration, while the communal nature of monastic life allowed for the sharing of knowledge and the collaborative development of ideas. There was a direct feedback loop between the theoretical understanding of mechanics and the practical application, leading to continuous improvement. So, the next time you hear a historical account that paints the medieval period as solely a time of superstition and decline, remember the monks. Remember their tireless work, their ingenious solutions, and their profound impact on the very fabric of daily life, particularly through their pioneering work in timekeeping and alarm mechanisms. They weren't just praying and copying manuscripts. They were building, inventing, and laying the crucial groundwork for the mechanical age. They were truly technological pioneers, whose quiet revolution continues to tick, chime, and buzz its way through our modern world, a powerful testament to the often overlooked ingenuity that flourished within the cloister. Their devotion to God led them to unlock the secrets of mechanical movement, shaping a world they could never have imagined. As the echoes of the medieval monastic alarm clock fade into the quiet hum of your modern environment, take a moment to truly appreciate the profound shift that occurred within those ancient monastery walls. What began as a spiritual necessity, the unwavering demand to mark the hours of prayer, evolved into a quiet revolution that profoundly reshaped how humanity perceives and interacts with time itself. It was a silent, relentless pursuit of order, driven by devotion, that ultimately gave birth to the very concept of mechanized punctuality. You have journeyed from the sun's arc and the stars' slow dance, through dripping water and burning candles, to the triumphant descent of falling weights and the rhythmic dance of the escapement. You've heard the human chain of awakening and the resounding clang of the mechanical bell striker. Each step, each ingenious adaptation, was a response to a fundamental human need to control and measure the fleeting moments of existence. The medieval monks, in their quiet pursuit of spiritual perfection, inadvertently became the pioneers of a technological revolution that would eventually orchestrate the entire globe. This wasn't just about building a better clock. It was about fundamentally altering the human relationship with time. Before these innovations, time was fluid, amorphous, dictated by the sun and the seasons. Afterwards, it became a quantifiable, divisible commodity, a series of precisely measured intervals. This shift, born in the monastery, paved the way for the rigorous schedules of factories, the synchronization of global commerce, and indeed, the very structure of our modern lives. The insistence on fixed hours for prayer led directly to the concept of the equal hour, a cornerstone of modern timekeeping. The monastic alarm clock, in all its forms, was more than a machine. It was a testament to the power of sustained intellectual effort and practical application in the face of daunting challenges. It reminds you that innovation isn't always born in flashy laboratories or driven by profit motives. Sometimes it emerges from the deepest spiritual aspirations, from the quiet dedication to a higher purpose. These medieval monks, often anonymous, their names lost to history, crafted devices that instilled a new sense of order and precision into their world, and subsequently into ours. Now, as your own day winds down, and the gentle arms of sleep begin to embrace you, let the stillness of the monastery wash over you. The long shadows lengthen, the last whisper of the wind dies down. The air cools, carrying only the faint, comforting scent of ancient stone and the distant, almost imperceptible tick-tock of an invisible, timeless clock. There are no harsh buzzers here, only the soft echo of a medieval bell, perfectly struck, calling you not to action, but to rest. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of those monks, knowing their tireless devotion to time had brought such profound order to their lives. Let that same sense of peace settle over you now. Your eyelids feel heavy, your breathing deepens, and the worries of the day gently drift away, carried off by the silent, steady march of time. Rest now, truly rest in the embrace of this timeless night.